So today we're looking at the chassis tube kits for the Escort Mark II. This is basically to replace the captive nuts inside the chassis rails that normally hold your cross member on. If you're not entirely sure how it works on the Escort, it's very primitive. You've got the cross member that runs across. At the end you've got two holes to the cross member, and then bolts come from below through the holes in the cross member into the chassis rails and screw up tight. However, sometimes, as in this case, the nuts inside the chassis rails that hold the bolts as they come up to screw into come loose, and then you can't screw the bolts in, or you can get them in but you can't get them very tight. So that's not very good at all. So what you can get is a chassis mount kit. Various companies making these. This one's just from Motorsport Tools. Pretty primitive kit as well. It's just basically an insert that will go through the chassis rail, and then through the middle of the insert goes a 10mm bolt. So the bolt comes in from the top now with the new kit. Bolt comes on, the nut comes on the bottom, through the chassis rail, cross member comes up, and then the nut screws on and holds everything nice and tight. So they're fitted quite easily. I've already fitted one side, both of them on one side, just to see how it was going to go. Wasn't entirely sure if it was going to be easy or not, and it's relatively easy. We'll show you what we've done. Basically, this side here, you can see this is the one that had the captive nut broken. So this was done slightly differently. Basically, from below, the hole was already big enough, 10mm. From the top, there was no hole, so ran a drill from below, straight up, to mark out the top, drilled through, so the drill bit was coming basically from the bottom all the way up through the chassis rail. Once you've got the hole at the top, you know roughly where you need to bore out. So you can drop the bolt in from the top to the bottom, and then you can just check to see how straight that bolt is in vertical, and making sure it's square within the chassis rail itself. Once you have an idea of how that top hole is, maybe if it's slightly off to one side or the other side, it's not to worry too much, because you're going to bore out that hole basically big enough to get the insert in. And it's the boring out of that hole which can influence how your insert goes in. So you can just play around with that, take it nice and easy, bore it out big enough to get the insert in. Once the insert's in, you drop the insert through, and once it's in, you can just spot weld the top, and then the whole thing's done. So here we are looking underneath the car. This is the forward section, facing forward here. This is the front crossmember hole, this is the rear crossmember hole, and this is just the drain hole for the chassis rail. There's a captive nut behind here, captive nut behind here. That's what the old bolts to the old crossmember used to bolt into. So all we've done at the moment is basically take the die grinder and just bore these holes out to about a 10mm. It's about 10.5mm actually. So we're just going to run that. We run that up there to fit that through, just to take out the threads. You could run a 10mm drill piece up there as well, if you've got quite a strong 10mm piece. So now what we're going to do is put this on the end of the drill, and we're going to run this up to markers on the top of the chassis rail, same front and rear. And once we've done that, we'll look at boring out the holes on top of the cross member. So as you can see now, we've got the holes that have come all the way through from below the chassis rail. If we just get to focus, there's one, and there's the other. So they've kind of come out pretty accurate straight away. They've come out in the middle of the chassis rail, and as you can see, once you put the bolt through, it drops very nicely straight through the bottom. So as you can see, that bolt there, crikey, come on, focus, you fucker. It's pretty straight. It's already come out parallel to everything it needs to be. This one does go through, takes a little bit more persuasion, but here you can see the top of the head is just angling towards the back of the car somewhat. The front of the bolt does need to come forward. But as I say at this stage, not to worry, because these holes at the top now are only 10mm, and we've got to bore them out with the die grinder to 16mm. So now we know when we bore out this hole, we can focus more of our efforts towards the front to elongate the hole out this way, and that one will just bore out symmetrically all the way around, because it's pretty much in the right position straight away. So that gives you a ballpark figure of what you're aiming for. So let's bore it out, let's get the inserts in. So once you've contoured your holes, to about 16mm, 17mm, you can drop your inserts in with the bolt. And there it goes, bolt comes out, and we're making sure that the bolt is 90 degrees to the chassis member. We've got a little bit of play on that. I elongated the hole just basically to fine tune this to make sure we're at 90 degrees, and about there is spot on. So that's how we're going to weld the front one, and second one exactly the same. We've just got a little bit of play in the top hole just to help us fine tune the bolt as it comes out the bottom. But that's it. As you can see, there's about 10mm of bolt, or insert should I say, on both of them, and that's basically because of the captive nut is still in the bottom of the cross member, or should I say the chassis rail here and here. If you'd taken that bolt out, these would have dropped in pretty much all the way flush with the top of the chassis rail. So what I'm going to do is just lob that 10mm off the top, that one and that one. Slightly less on this one because we've got the double skin of the engine mount, basically bringing the height of the chassis rail up just a little bit, as you can see. But we'll mark that, we'll chop that off, and then they'll insert nicely and sit flush with the top of the cross member. The advantage for me, I think, of keeping the nut in the bottom is that if you only take it out to 10mm, which is about the same width as the bolt going through, there's very little play at the bottom. So the location of the bottom hole is spot on with the cross member. Basically, there's no real movement in this bottom bolt here. So the location should be spot on. The only thing we've created is a little bit of movement at the top to help make sure everything's lined up properly. But that's it. Now we're just going to lob 10mm off the top of each one and weld them in. So here's the final results. Once you've cut them down to size, you just drop them in. Make sure the angle is great. Weld them around the top, and then either die grind back the weld or lineage back the weld. Just sand it back just so the bolt can go in with a washer on the top, nice and flush. As you can see, that's the hole all cleaned up, and the alignment is absolutely spot on. Just drop it in, drop straight in, straight through the cross member. Put the cross member on just to make sure everything does line up, and it's absolutely spot on. 2 bolts in this side. We've already got the 1 bolt that side with the nut on just to hold the cross member. As you can see, that one just drops in a treat. It's absolutely spot on. Perfect. Happy with that. So next is just to finish this bit of a rust there in the front chassis leg, you've probably noticed, and then we've got to look at some odds and sods in the boot. But apart from that, we're getting closer to primer. Perfect.